Hi, everyone. I had an interesting question come up related to consumer surplus and how to think about that in a specific context. So the idea was, what about goods or services where I really only want one of them? Excuse me. Maybe like a phone. Most people don't need more than one of those, or an apartment to rent. It's kind of too expensive to have more than one of those. So how to think about consumer surplus? I'm just going to draw some really messy diagrams here and illustrate a couple of points. So typically, consumer surplus is just given by this intersection or by this area of a triangle between the prevailing market price. Yeah, you'll like my skills with a mouse here. So usually consumer surplus is this right triangle, and you've got that 1/2 times base times height in order to calculate it, and that's your consumer surplus. But that seems a little odd if you've got only one unit, and what if your unit falls like right here, and then what is this, how do I think about that? I just want to take the opportunity to point out that actually the important thing about consumer surplus is that you can the definition does not change even if the demand curve looks kind of funny. So let's think about what the demand curve actually is in this context. So let's just get this nice little diagram going. Ooh, that's one really sloppy supply curve and our demand curve. That's the usual way to do it. But if we're going to diagram this out for just one person and they only want one unit, all these other units actually don't really matter. Your willingness to pay falls. Remember, an individual person's demand curve just reflects how much they're willing to pay for a unit or of a good or service. So let me just get rid of this and show you what it will look like if to model a demand curve like that. All right, so you got a quantity of 1 here, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And the supply curve is as normal, etc. And let's suppose that we're talking about a phone and that your willingness to pay is exactly 800. You are willing to pay 800 to get a new phone. And let's suppose that that's up here. That's 800. I'm going to put an 8. So your willingness to pay for 1 unit, quantity of 1, goes out to here. Okay, so you're willing to pay 800 for that. But for unit 2, it falls all the way down to 0. For unit 3, also 0, 4, etc. Your willingness to pay falls to 0 after quantity of 1. Now, this isn't the normal downward sloping, nice, easy line that we're used to, but this is actually still a demand curve. It's a funny looking one, but it is absolutely still a valid demand curve. And so we would calculate your individual consumer surplus in the same way. You would find the intersection between this supply curve and your funky looking demand curve. And let's just say that the market price here is 300. And now instead of having a consumer surplus that's given by a right triangle, we have a consumer surplus that's given by this rectangle. And we know what the dimensions of it are. We know that the base of it is exactly 1 because it goes from 0 to 1. We know that the height of it is 500 because it goes from 300 to 500. So this is a this is a height of 500. And so we can tell from this diagram that actually your consumer surplus here, which is this rectangle, yeah, this whole guy right here, we can tell that this is a total consumer surplus of 500. 1 times 500 is 500. So that is how you would diagram one of these strange cases where you really want one and only one of a good or service. The definition of consumer surplus doesn't change. It's still the difference between the price that you have to pay, which in this case is 300, and the amount that you're willing to pay, which in this case is 800. All right, that's all I got.